Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1, we're up to chapter 155. Page Shinhei 305. So in the middle of the discourse, Pinchas Ayin Gimel. Is that discourse 40? 39? 39. Sorry, 39. Okay. So the context of what we've been discussing, especially in the second so-called phase of Ayin Beis that started with Shavuos Ayin Gimel, so we're catching up actually. So Shavuos is coming, and we'll already be a little ahead of the game here. Is that after the long discussion in so-called phase 1, stage 1, about the Gvul and Bli Gvul, the Eir HaGvul, Eir HaBli Gvul, began discussing the effect of Eir HaBli Gvul and Eir HaGvul on existence. And briefly, that Eir HaBli Gvul introduces Bittul, a true Bittul into existence. And Eir HaGvul also has Bittul, but it's as a result of Eir HaBli Gvul, because since Eir HaGvul, which is the finite, immanent energy, is commensurate and tailored to existence, so it's part of existence. It's true, it's a divine element within existence, but it's still related to existence. You cannot deny existence. Whereas the Lakush of Bli Gvul is beyond existence, does not manifest in it, it's transcendent, and therefore it has an element of, that it introduces as Bittul. That was the opening points back in chapter, where do we begin there? When we started Shavuos, chapter 127. To understand that, he went into a discussion of the difference between the Avos and Matan Torah. Now, it was the work of the patriarchs pre-Sinai, and then what the Chiddush of Matan Torah. To explain that, basically went into the whole pasuk Ve'era El Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Bekel Shaddai. Now Shmi Havaya Lo Nadaiti Lahem. So Kel Shaddai, as he explained, Shaddai is the Lakus, the divine that is Dai, that says enough, that limits the flow. It's a Lakus within existence, but it's in a limited flow, and all the different interpretations of Dai. Bottom line is that the Avos, their role was to reintroduce godliness into existence after it was concealed, after the eating from the tree of knowledge, and to expand that as much as humanly possible, as just expand the boundaries. We said even Ad Bli Dai, but it's still with the word Dai. Okay, to explain that, the Rebbe Rashab went into the whole discussion of the two types of Yichud: a Yichud that brings a new energy in, which would be Matan Torah, and a Yichud that maintains or renews the energy within existence, which would be more the Avos. There's the Yichud Yisrael Saba Tfuna, which is Abba Ve'ima Tatoin, and then there's Yichud Abba Ve'ima Eloin, which is the higher Yichud. And to discuss that, he went through we've discussed the two types of Hamshachas, Atzilus for Atzilus, Atzilus for Biyah, the difference between letters and Cyrus, between letters and hair. Two types of Ilah Va'al. One, that the effect is of the same personality, the same muhus as the cause. That would be like a branch from a tree, or a seichel of a student from a teacher. Or a Ilah Va'al that is also Ilah Va'al, cause and effect. We're not talking Yesh Ma'ayin, but the cause and effect are not the same personality. That would be Moichin and Midas. And the whole discussion about how Moichin and Midas, even though Midas are born from intelligence, but they're not of the same personality as intelligence. And what the Avos did, we learned, they brought into Midas as much as you could from Meichin that's connected to Midas, but not Meichin be'etzem. The etzem Meichin is a higher level, that would be Matan Torah. Again, we haven't gotten to the Matan Torah part so much, but he keeps referring to it, so I'm mentioning it. And to understand that, that's where we got to this Maimer Pinchas, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, what that means. And briefly, Iyu is the Etzem Ha'er, that manifests in two different ways. One is how it goes into Chayui, and that's an air, particularly Eir HaBli Gvul. And the second is Iyu v'Garmui Echad is like a different dimension of Elikus, how it goes into the Kelim, into Garmui. The Kelim. It explained at length what those Kelim are. Keich HaGvul. The Keich HaGvul, the Rishimu, is a concealed power. You reveal its power through the Keich HaBligvul, as he explained. The bottom line, however, is that there's two different dimensions, Keich HaBligvul, Keich HaGvul, and they both have a different type of Yichud with Iyu. And hence, we have the two expressions, Iyu v'Chayu Echad. The Iyu is a different dimension that connects with Chayu, that's the Eir HaBligvul, the Keich HaGilui, as he called it. And then there's Iyu v'Garmui Echad, is how Iyu connects with the Keich HaGvul, the Keich HaHelam, Keich to create Yesh. Which, as he explained in the previous chapter, 154, has to be Helam in order for there to be a Yesh. So this power has to be a concealer, not a revealer. Okay. So Chayu hi b'chinas Eir d'Sharshay Mekeich HaBligvul, and Iyu shemisyachdim Chayu Elias b'chinas Gili, that's Gili, and there's Iyu v'Garmui Echad is in the root is the Keich HaGvul, which will also be the Rishimu and the Kelim, that it creates the Kelim. So I'll just read the last few lines from chapter 154, just the top of the page. Actually, you know what? We'll go a few more lines. We'll just the conclusion. So here we go. I'm going to read from the bottom of 304 quickly, from the 6 lines from the bottom. V'zeu Iyu v'Garmui Echad Iyu b'chinas Keich HaGvul shebein sof v'misachdim Garmui lifel pulas esavos. Iyu is the Keich HaGvul shebein sof. It's also Ein Sof, but it's the Keich HaGvul, that Iyu. And that unites with the Kelim in order to create, to bring existence into being. And also after they exist, to maintain and sustain their existence. The other Iyu, Chayu, is that Chayu is the Eris. However, Chayu refers to the energies. The Sheresh Eris is made in Seif HaBligvul. The root of the Eris is made in Seif HaBligvul. That Gam Sheresh by Gam Kibchinis Midav HaGvul, and even though we learned that the Eir also manifests, and there's also Chesed, Gura, etc. in Eir, the Gam B'Shash Neim B'chinis Chesed spheres, and even in their root there's the 10 hidden spheres, the 10 spheres. We learned in chapter 16 and 27 that's not the Keich HaGvul to create containers, create structure. That's how the infinite divine light, Shir Ba'atz, may envision in himself or allocate it, estimated within himself. So it's the infinite possibilities of that projector of white light, the field of energy, to also radiate in a defined way. But it's not the definition itself; it's the energy, so-called saying. Instead of infinite possibilities, here are the 10 spheres. So if that's the case, as we learned then, so their actual root of energy, even Eir HaGvul, is rooted in Eir HaBligvul, that shows to now define itself in 10. And that's the meaning when you say separately Iyu v'Chayu Echad, and not Iyu v'Garmui Echad. That's the Iyu that connects with the Keich HaBligvul. Shu b'chinas is galus ha'atzmus canal. That's an expression of atzmus on the terms of atzmus, without any filters, without any additional message or code saying stop the flow or limit the flow or or define yourself in a certain way. Shemisachdim eiris. That's his galus ha'atzmus that's united with eiris. Hu b'chinas Keich HaGilui shebein sof. That's the power of Gili within Ein Sof. V'zeu the b'chinas Iyu shemisachdim Garmui Keich Ein Sof. These b'chinas esavos. And the Iyu shemisachdim Garmui, however, the level dimension of the Keich Ein Sof that unites with Garmui, with the containers, that's the Keich Ein Sof that there should be creation. Hainu li is b'chinas hahelam. That is a power that is there should be a concealment, not a revelation. It also expresses the divine desire, but it doesn't express it in any revealed fashion that, from the perspective of the creature of the creatures, they can sense it. In Eir HaBligvul, everyone will sense that it's divine. And the Iyu that unites with Chayu, that's Ein Sof the way it's in a form of Gili and revelation. And here's now the meaning in the Tikkun Hazeh, that the level of Iyu means you, God. Even though both of them are Keich Ein Sof, you can't split God into parts. But they're referring to two powers within Ein Sof. B'kol Mokum b'chinas Iyu she'misyachadim chayui shezeu b'chinas Keich HaGilui she'b'chinas Ein Sof b'chinas Bligul ha'zeh b'chinas Gevei v'na'il yes b'chinas Iyu she'misyachadim gamui. Nevertheless, this level of Iyu that unites with the Chayu, which is the revelation of the divine infinite light, is a higher level in revelation than the Iyu that unites with the Gamui, which conceals and limits the flow, which on a conscious level or a revealed level is less Gili. Even though in its purpose and the deeper root of it can be a far deeper expression of Atzmus, as we learned before, that it reveals not just the Gili of Atzmus. What was the expression there? He said the Lashon was that the air is Megala Metzias Atzmus, and also Keich Atzmus. And the Kelim are Megala Eifen HaAtzmus, which is more the personality of what Atzmus is like, that he's not limited by Gili and so on. But even that revelation comes only after there's an Eir HaBligvul. So as we explained, simply put, if you saw a table, you'd know that someone put it here, but you'd know nothing about that person. It's just Eir reveals that there's a source. And then you see Eir shining on this table, then you know the table as a yesh must come from a place that's Atzmus must be even beyond Eir, as we discussed. So just to get it up to speed, we reviewed that. So let's move on at the Kuf Nun Hey. Hope that was helpful. Chapter 155. Now remember, just to go back, that there was two interpretations in Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. All this is according to the Alter Rebbe's interpretation of Geras HaKedesh, that chayui is Eiris, and Gamui are Kelim. But remember that Arizal teacht that chayui is Meichen, Gimel Rishenis, and Gamui is Zayin Tachtenis, which would really be Meichen and Midas. Which brings it back to the ideas we were discussing earlier about Meichen and Midas. And clearly, the Rebbe Rashab is going to tie it together. So now, V'hine, now, behold. Not exactly. V'hine, now, Be'geres HaKedesh da Iyu v'chayu echad. Move on, and Geras HaKedesh, which was cited earlier, it's understood, the B'chinas Iyu she'misyachadim gamu is the B'chinas Er Pnimi ha'misyachadim ha'kelim. So you have somewhat a question here. If you look in the Geras HaKedesh, it doesn't say Gamui ha'kelim. It says Iyu she'misyachadim ha'gamui is not Keich HaGvul in the Shimu, is the B'chinas Er Pnimi ha'misyachadim ha'kelim. It's the immanent energy that unites with the containers. So till now we were learning Iyu v'chayu echad, all Eiris are connected to Chayui. Even Eir HaGvul, remember, is part of Shir Atzmi of the Eir HaBligvul. So Eir HaBligvul will be infinite energy or infinite light. And it manifests, and God wants it, Shir Atzmi, He designates that it should be. That's Chayui. What's Garmui? The Kelim. A Keich HaGvul to create Kelim. But in the Geras HaKedesh, it's understood that the Iyu that unites with Garmui is also Eir Pnimi. It's not a real question, it's just a so-called qualification and clarification. However, it's also understood there in Geras HaKedesh that this Eir Pnimi is not just, we're talking Eir, it's also for the purpose of creation. Lo b'chinas atzmis ha'eris. In other words, so that right away minimizes the question. Because in Geras HaKedesh, she's not speaking about Eir as in that God, the Eir HaBligvul, wants now to manifest in a finite way, 10 hidden spheres. Now talk about Atzmis HaEiris v'Kelim, where they are on their own. The whole point is how it's talking about how it's in order to create, to live Pulas Eisavos. It's interesting, he doesn't just say B'chinas Atzmis HaEiris, he also says B'chinas Atzmis HaEiris v'Kelim. Why does he add that? How it says Er Pnimi ha'misyachadim ha'kelim.
You're not talking about manifestation, you're talking about creation.
Right, something like that, or purpose of creation. Well, let's see where he's going. I don't want to elaborate till I see the end of the thing. He wants to just clarify in a Geras HaKodesh. If you look there, you're not going to find that Garmui is, the Iyuv Garmui is talking about Eir Keich HaGvul of Kelim. That's what he's saying. You're talking about Eir Pnimi that goes into the Kelim. So he's explaining, however, it's still talking about how Eir is relating to existence. Let's finish reading it and we'll see what he's going to say. V'hainu, this means V'hainu, that is, Masha Kelim Magbila Se'er Lifel Kfi Efen Mahusa Dafka. So we're not talking so much from the perspective of the Eir, like we did before. We said the Eir Habligvul is Shir Atzmi B'Kayach. There, the Eir, the so-called field of energy, or it's even lower than the field of energy, as we discussed. But let's put it, the infinite flow of energy is allocating or estimating in itself that would like to now flow into 10 spheres. That's the perspective of Eir. That's how Eir looks at it. In a Geras HaKodesh, the point, even though he's talking about Eir, but he's talking about Eir, how it's being impacted by Kel, how the Keli is Magbila Se'er Lifel Kfi. It's almost like two perspectives. Here, think of it like this. Here's Eir HaBligvul looking at Eir HaGvul, and a Geras HaKodesh is the other way around. It's Eir HaGvul, but it's how it's being impacted by the Kelim. See the difference? So it's a little more subtle.
Can you just say it
What's
again?
the
Just went through me.
Your Messiah?
Just say the last statement you just said again, please.
Fine. The way we talked is Iyu v'chayu echad, Ir v'gamur echad, we talked about as two elements of Iyu. One is, they're both Koyach Ein Sof, they're both God's power. But one is God's power to reveal, and reveal in infinite possibilities. And one's God's power to conceal, and to allow structure to emerge, a yesh. Two powers. They're not the same power. They come from the same source, but they have two different effects. Now, but the plot thickens. That would be simple if it was two separate. Remember, B'tzad Achdus, they need to come together. So how in the root, how does this happen? So he says like this. So the Eir HaBligvul, however, has another dimension in it. This Eir wants, and a Shir imagines or allocates or estimates that this Eir that was infinite expression should be 10 expressions, 10 spheres. That's from perspective of Eir. That's still Iyu v'chayu echad. That's still part of Chayui energy, because it's rooted in Eir HaBligvul, and its focus is God's divine expression, except He wants to express Himself in a finite way. But that's not structure yet. That will fit into the structure. That will reveal itself in the structure, to put it more precisely. Then there's a Koyach HaGvul, the Rishimu, the Oisias, the letters. But they're letters. They're not the idea within the letters. That's the structure. That's what will ultimately become and create substance and matter, of we call the Yesh. That requires concealment. Fine. So we have that's one picture. But when you look in the Geras HaKodesh, she says, and that's Iyuv v'Garmui Echad, the second thing. Iyuv v'chayu echad would include all that. But you look in the Geras HaKodesh, he applies Iyuv v'Garmui Echad not just to Kelim, but to the Eir that is inside the Kelim. So seemingly there's a little, it's not exactly what we said till now. Till now we were saying Iyuv v'Garmui is pure Kelim, structure, fine. Iyuv v'chayu is still energy. So the Rebbe Rashab is dividing that itself in two ways. That the limited energy can be seen from the perspective of Eir HaBligvul. It's just another manifestation of me, the artist. But Geras HaKodesh, he's not focusing on that part of Eir. He's focusing on the Eir as it's impacted by the Kelim. So it's not focusing on the artist that can make this piece of art. It's focusing now the artist is applying himself to actually paint. But to paint, you also need Eir. So the Eir is being impacted by the Kelim, and that's what Iyuv v'Garmui Echad is. So really, in Eir itself, there's two levels. There's how Iyuv v'chayu echad, Eir is affected by the Eir HaBligvul, that would be Iyuv v'chayu echad. Then there's Eir as it's impacted by Kelim, that would be Iyuv v'Garmui Echad. That's what he's adding here.
This is the Orthus Mislavish and Kli.
All Eir Gvul is Mislabish and Keli. There's no such thing as an Eir that there's no.
This is the Or that makes the Kli.
No. The makes a Keli we made clear is a whole different dimension. That's not what we're talking about. What makes?
When it says the Or Pinimi, it's Or.
It's clear Or Pinimi for sure. If you use the artist, it's I think a very good example. When the artist is sitting by himself and says, "You know what? I have infinite ways, different pieces of art I can create. I'm going to create one piece of art." It's still all within his big infinite flow. He just now decided, I'm going to make a field. I'm going to make the picture of a face. I'm going to make a horizon or whatever. But it's all within Eir. Now comes the steps of process. It takes the canvas, starts painting. So we know the kelim are the canvas and the paint and all the details. But it's being informed also by Eir. It's not just a blind canvas. The projection of light, like when you use the example of the projector, is now going through the film. Except the difference is, if you're looking from the projector's perspective, the light is just flowing, it's now being shaped by the film. But if you're looking from the perspective of the film, or there's also an Eir. But here Eir is now being focused on what its role is in creating the art, not its role in expressing the divine. That's the key. In other words, Eir is to express the divine. Sometimes it expresses it through Blikvul, sometimes through Gvul. Not Koyach HaGvul, Eir HaGvul. Here we're talking about Eir as it's now being used by the keli, by the paintbrush, to make one color. That's no longer just Eir HaGvul. Eir HaGvul is the way you envision the color in your being. Now you're talking about actually creating that color, and you need something that brings it to life. Like we said, by the way, we said earlier also, besides that the keli is a kiyum, is from the power, it also has chayis coming from the neshama. Yeah, right. He says, "Chayis sheyesh be'etzem hakem l'kamitz from the vada er hamislabish b'teichem." That's the Koyach. Yeah, the Koyach HaGvul is the power to actually sustain the body, not the life within the body that comes from the soul. That's for sure different level. Okay, good. Look, it's a very subtle difference, but you see how you have to go slowly, and you see in the interface how it's valuable, because you actually have now steps. What you're developing here is now we have a step where Eir HaBlikvul becomes Eir HaGvul, and we have our Eir HaGvul becomes impacted by Kelim. It's a very logical structure here. It makes sense. If you took out one of these steps, you'd have a leap that would make a problem. That would be like missing a switch. Like how does Eir HaBlikvul, how do you connect to Eir HaBlikvul when you're in Kelim? There'd be no way to connect. But since the Eir HaBlikvul is envisioning let's say the color blue or the Sfira Chesed, and then the Kelim are being created by the Koyach HaGvul, so you actually have a Klei Chesed. Now the Eir Chesed that's envisioned by the Eir HaBlikvul can be shaped by the Keli and manifest in it. So the Eir that goes into the Keli then therefore has a taste of the Eir HaBlikvul, but it also is now affected by Metzias HaGvul. It's a very interesting, it's a very eloquent type of fusion.
So how does the actual Kli come to be?
God's Koyach, to create Gvul, to conceal and create a Yesh. It's Koyach Atzmus. It's the opposite of Gili. It's the will to create. Imagine an artist that doesn't just paint. He creates the paintbrush.
Okay.
That's no artistic idea can make a paintbrush. You need a separate Koyach to create a paintbrush. The artist can come and say, here's the art I want to create. But who made the brush? Okay. Who made the canvas? So the muscle you can, an artist, obviously a human artist, doesn't create a brush.
Right.
But imagine here, so it's the creation of the brush. The actual physical brush. Yeah, that creates Metzias Elam.
And then comes what the Gvul that fills the Ein Sof.
That would just be a dead brush. It wouldn't be able to do anything. It would just be an inanimate brush. Be a table.
They both come from the same source.
Right.
Everything comes from God.
It's like when somebody dies.
The different ihu.
Somebody dies.
Koyach HaGvul, Koyach HaBlikvul, two different sources.
Still got the Shabbos and Kelim.
What?
When somebody dies, they still have the Shabbos of the Kelim.
The body is there. Yeah, exactly. You have that. That's the proof that it's two separate things. That's how he wanted it.
I just don't get it. This ihu v'garmehu chad. The garmehu hat zwei Sachen in sich. The kli itself and the ihu.
The ihu is united with the power of the ihu. The Koyach HaGvul Shebein Sof is united with the Gvul.
But it's not the same ihu that is
no.
Ihu v'chayehu?
No.
It's a different ihu?
Yeah. Different level of ihu.
It allows things to exist.
It
exists.
Ihu is not Atzmus. Ihu is a Koyach HaGvul. Like he says, Koyach HaGvul Shebein Koyach Ein Sof says that Ihu Shemesachad im Gamur Koyach Ein Sof Lias B'chinas Yisavus. Ihu Shemesachad im Kachayu is Koyach Ein Sof Lias B'chinas Gili.
the Garmehu itself, he's not talking about it at all here?
He did. He said the Garmei will become the Kalim. He spoke about the whole previous chapter. 2 chapters. First he said his bones, like the structure, the skeleton.
Like what he said in the Kitzur of the previous chapter, when he says,
so that's the skeleton.
And the only difference is that they become a Mitzius. That's where the Kli becomes a Kli.
You ask me how a Keli becomes a Keli? I'm not, what? What's the question?
The process.
Of what?
Of a Kli being created, and then the Kli perceiving the...
It wasn't here with the chapter,
whatever, no.
There's 2 chapters about, whole chapters just about this.
The Beine, danach the skin, the Huid. Danach die ganze Sache.
Before the Tzimtzum and the Keich HaGvul is encompassed within the Keich HaBli, obviously no Keli is going to emerge. Just like letters that are submerged in ideas. That's the Tzimtzum. When the Tzimtzum conceals the Keich HaBli, what remains is a shimul of a skeleton, which will then come to life after the Tzimtzum, until it becomes really tangible containers, till it becomes physical containers in this world. What's missing in that?
And then comes the Chayes.
No, it comes together. The Chayes helps it also develop, like a neshama helps a body grow. The body is not rooted in the soul. It's a long discussion we had here about this. However, the soul brings it to life. Think of it like this. You have a seed in the ground. If you don't water it, the seed's going to die. You water it, the water doesn't make the seed. The water waters the seed. So the neshama brings alive the kalim, which have their own root. After death, the body doesn't disappear when the soul leaves, because it has its own source. But alone, it will be dead. It will be inanimate. It will be not conscious. Think of a human being that's just a body, then you have no consciousness of God. If we were just stones, inanimate stones, we'd exist. But there's no consciousness. You couldn't say, I know God. You could say, at most you could say a stone maybe is aware that it has a source, but there's no real consciousness we know, no gilui.
We know the Oratos creates it from E equals MC squared.
Right.
S equals energy over.
But yet it comes from, so you have both, you need both. He said, made it clear at the beginning of the chapter, he said, Zeg Gufish Kuvul is B'chinas Helm, because the Kavana is there should be Yesh. If everything came through Eir, there would be no ability for us to feel independent, because Eir can't feel independent. Eir is always Gili. Eir always testifies to a source. The fact that we could be in existence and say there's no source, or deny the source, or ignore the source, means there's something else keeping us, what's giving us that ability? How could something not reflect its source? So you have to say it's not Eir.
It's coming from another track. That's
right, exactly. So you have to say it's coming from another power of Atzmus, the power to conceal, the power to create, the power to, however you want to define it, Kayach Esavos. It's clear from existence. Existence testifies to this. There's no way around that. Even if you were to say, by the way, that existence is an illusion, where does that illusion come from? Eir can't have an illusion that it doesn't have a source. It's just not possible. I mean, this is the root of what he's talking before about Ilav Ol, where ultimately something can feel that it's a Mahus Nivdal, it's like separate from. We don't feel, although we're born from parents, and once you were connected for 9 months by umbilical cord to your mother, and everything she ate, you ate, and everything she breathed, you breathed, etc., completely dependent. Had that not taken place, life could not have emerged. Today, you don't feel like, oh, here's my connection, and it was just cut. Some people, I guess, still are haunted by their mothers that way. But I need to say, you don't feel it consciously. You know it, but you don't feel it. That's like a miracle almost. Here's a child, a baby, completely dependent, not just dependent, completely within another human being, and now that person is speaking back to that source and actually rebelling and doesn't care what she says or doesn't say. Possible, right? It's a pretty amazing thing. How's that possible?
Problem.
It's interesting. Like a human being and God. Yeah.
Right. Because that's the way it was created. That there's some independent power implanted in this thing, even though it came completely from. Now, even there we know that it didn't come. The child doesn't come from the mother. The child comes from an egg that was fertilized by a seed that was blessed by God to conceive. But nevertheless, the process does come through the mother, and essentially the neshama that's feeding the soul, the body, through the whole process of pregnancy and so on. It's an excellent example for the whole process, because you have a yesh emerging, but it's not yet a yesh as long as it's inside the womb. I wouldn't say that's an example for Lifnei Tzimtzum, because Lifnei Tzimtzum you can't say there's a fetus inside of a womb. But conceptually you can say one thing is completely encompassed in another, doesn't have the ability to...
One thing is encompassed into the other, that's encompassed in
yeah, like that, yeah. But in the Lifnei Tzimtzum you wouldn't even say it's a fetus in a womb, you'd say it's a conceptual power within a higher power. Yeah. Yeah. It's an artist who has infinite possibilities, envisioning one. That's all he's doing. And it could stop right there and nothing will happen. For Dida B'Tachtenim, you have to have another force that creates think of an artist that has that, but it doesn't have, God forbid, hands or tools. What remains with his idea? It's an idea, that's it. You can't, it'll never come into being. Imagine another person just has tools and doesn't have any aid. Then you just have a brush and canvas and then nothing. Or gibberish. Yeah. I mean, the more examples you find this, if you find your own examples, it'll show that you're really getting it. You need examples for it. Remember, you're talking about realities that are not tangible. He was talking about how existence was before it existed. So it's like, that's why you need examples like the seed in the ground, the fetus, the idea. I mean, that's the key. Now, once you learn Chassidus properly and you really start getting it, then you don't always need the mashal. You relate to that concept. But mashalim are very helpful in this case. Tremendously helpful, because we have real examples of how things were once in a state that was abstract, and now it's in a state of tangible. And how that happened. Even the process, think of all this, is talking about how an idea comes into consciousness. Right there, every second of your life, things are coming from a state of ayin into a state of yesh. Now, much of it remains in ayin, but some of it seeps into our lives. Now, the thing is, why it's difficult is because we live so much in the yesh, we don't think about, say, Ezu Chacham Harayas and Neilit. You need to be a Chacham to see the Neilit. Most of us are we see the product. Hey, give me a table, I have a table. Give me money, I have money. Very few people think about how did this come to be and how that thing that causes it to be is right now affecting it now. But Chassidus, it means you see not just what will come. Hanel, you see the birthing. You understand how something was birthed, not just that you have the result of it. It's a very profound tool to really look at the root of things, how things come to be. Nothing is just the way it is on its own. And I'm just saying, it's just a tremendous tool. Like, look at yourself in the mirror, and then look at yourself as a picture when you were a day old or a year old. How'd that become this? You ever think about that? And it's not, a lot has happened in between. Yeah. What's the word? Neshama kommt up in Azrudike Fleish and Beiner. What was his expression? Yeah. I think the Frierdiker Rebbe has an expression. He says, the Meach versteht, the Herz fühlt, und der Neshama lebt über. How do you translate that?
Experiences it.
But more than lebt über means endure. Whatever the whole. It's more than submerged. Lebt über could be a type of I don't know if suffering, but endures it all.
Puts up with it.
Or tolerates it all, yeah.
Okay. So that's what we're saying. So Mashakeli Magbul Se'elifil Kafi Efen Muhusa Dafka. Here we go. So Kamel Derech Moshe, like an example, Beguva Nefesh, with a body and a soul. After all the, I guess, virtues, qualities that the guf has, that the body has through the fact that the soul manifests and clothes itself within it, and is revealed and united through the body, or in the body. So he's saying the following. Remember, we're speaking two perspectives of how to look at the air.
Yeah.
One second. If you speak from the perspective of Eir HaBli, as you said, Dasali, I don't know, whatever, from the Eir HaBli, so then the Eir HaBli is infinite possibilities, infinite energy, looking at one particular energy. From that perspective, it's just another form of energy. That's all it is. But when you look at the perspective from the keli, from the container, how it impacts the air, how it draws it into itself. And now we're looking at the body now. The body is being energized and by the soul. So he's saying, so after all the virtues and qualities of the soul being manifest inside the body, the bottom line, however, is Hadiyaguf mizgaber ala nefesh. The body dominates over the soul. It takes control of it. The Eir HaBli Gvul, the Eir HaGvul, as seen from the Eir HaBli Gvul, is controlled by Eir HaBli Gvul. It's an Eir. It's controlled by the power of Gili. Once the Eir comes into a Keli, what happens? The Keli takes over. The Keli is now shaping the Eir according to its needs. That's what he's saying.
It's pulling it in.
Now the energy, which began as an energy in a very pure form, is now coming in Hakshama, is becoming very, let's call it crass, coarse, very materialized, according to the organs of the body. So let's think for a moment like this. Think of the power of eyesight before it goes into your eye. The soul has the power to see. That's a very sublime power. You could say it's almost equal to the soul itself. It's not the soul, but it's a pure energy. Once it comes into the eye is directly impacting the energy. If your eye is weak, for example, the energy will be weak. Your eye now sees physical things. Now this energy is no longer just a possibility to see. It's now become very much defined by the eye. Or to go to the example of the artist. Once he's putting his art with a brush on the canvas, it's no longer just his idea. As a matter of fact, many artists will tell you that they have problems once they put it on the canvas. It's not exactly as they envisioned it. Because now you're dealing with the limitations of a physical world. And physical manifestation has impact on this air. It's a very critical piece here. Because he's trying to explain how air that started from Eir HaBli Gvul is now going into Kelim, and this is why it's called Garmui, not Chayui anymore. See what he's saying here, doing here? The Evri Haguf, the organs of the body, the limbs of the body, as the energy manifests in them, they are now taking control and channeling it that it should be powers, faculties that are no longer just ethereal and spiritual. They should be shaykhis, they have now a relationship with Yonim Gashmi. Like, for example, the mind that's now thinking of a physical thing. We're not talking about Haskalah, what is Atzilus or what is God. Haskalah, for example, how to turn a light bulb into a whatever. I don't know why I came up with that. I just turned a light bulb in yesterday. We came up. But some other Haskalah Gashmis. What would be Haskalah Gashmis? Anything. How to go make a meal. How to go maneuver in business. So suddenly now the keiches, the body and its faculties are taking the seichel and making it a Haskalah Gashmis. If the neshama were left to its own accord without the body, what would it be thinking about? God. It would be learning Torah. It would be involved in divine matters. Here, the body is making it to be involved in material matters. We're not saying this now right now is a bad thing. It's just a mitzias. Another example. Now the power of vision that could have been used, let's say, to see something spiritual or see something profound, is being used to see something physical. You see a table, you see a chair, you see people, trees, birds. There are birds left in New York, right? Some birds? Yeah, I see birds. Yeah. Once in a while I see a red bird and a blue bird. There are the few rare sightings.
I see him in my backyard.
You ever do bird watching?
Recently, no.
Yeah, sometimes in my backyard I get all these.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody's still
Prospect
canceling
Park,
on
they have
it.
red birds.
Yeah. Yeah. They have. We saw some deer.
Is there a red woodpecker in my backyard?
Yeah. So da nefesh mitzad atzmei hari ein shayacha l'inyanim gashmim klal. Because the nefesh on its own is a spirit. It's an ethereal, sublime spirit. Has no relationship to gashmis at all. This, by the way, is discussed at length in chapter, I believe, chapter 3 or something like that, 2 or 3. Right? The same thing, the faculties of the soul. You see how precisely is not just the nefesh, but also the faculties of the nefesh, which would be like the Eir Hagvul, essentially. I think that's like a good example. Nefesh would be like Ihu, in this case. Keiches HaNefesh is like Ihu v'chayui. So they too, Kedim Hislapshusim Beguf, Hari'enim Sheyachim Linyanim Gashmi. Before they manifest in a body, what are the faculties of the soul? A soul above. It also has Keiches. We know it has Chachma, Bina, Das, and so on. What are they like?
Why are you so sure of that?
Why am I so sure? First of all, the Alter Rebbe says it in time.
But before it's manifested.
No, he spoke at length. He spoke. First of all, very simple. What you say? You want to say the eye on its own creates a power of vision?
The soul is I think it's consciousness. It has consciousness. Why do we have to say that it has kayach?
He brought all the proofs earlier because what you're trying to say is like this. Just like electricity shine, let's say, goes into an appliance, and here it makes the light burn, and here it makes heat or something else. Why not just say the neshama is like that? So he made the strong case, or this will go back in the beginning, that it doesn't work that way. If that's the case, you're basically saying that the power of vision could go into the ears. And it's not that way. If that's the case, why not be able to see with your ears?
Because the Keli directs that power.
So the question is, does the power also fit into this? Is there a particular power that fits in?
No,
you have to say there is. You have to say, we talked about this.
There's a feedback mechanism in both.
You're almost asking, how do you know there's an Eir HaGvul? Why don't you say it's only Eir HaGvul that goes according to the colors of the containers?
No, what I'm
right?
saying.
In other words, it's like water, plain water.
Yeah.
That just, I understand what you're asking. We talked about it. He brings proofs. The proofs he primarily brings is you see that the way it functions like an Eir Pnimi, not like what you're describing. Ratzon works like that. A desire, so it impacts no matter where you are. The desire to move your hand
Functions like an Eir Pnimi, you have to go into the goof.
No, but for example, desire. When you want to move your hand or you want to move your foot, there's no difference. It's one energy just telling this, or it's like nerves, just different nerves. But the way it functions, like you say, a person sees, it appears that it's not just that the container is creating the sight, but that there's something in the power to see. I'll give you an example. You can have, for example, you could see this today. You can have, God forbid, the person has a damaged limb, and it's not that they don't have the power to move, it's just the nerve has been severed. You can see sometimes they want and it doesn't move. So it's not pshat, it's just that the keli doesn't let it happen, but you can't say there's no power there. As a matter of fact, for example, if you use a prosthetic, right, and suddenly you can make it move, except not because there's an energy outside of the container. I mean, is there an absolute proof?
That's a life force, but that's not Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura. Let me breaking it down that way.
Okay, but let's take Meichen and Midas. That, in other words, you have to use the Keiches HaNam. No, you can't use the Meichen and Midas really because you're not going to open a heart and see emotions. But it's better to use Keich HaRiyah and Keich HaShmiya. That's the best example. The two options are that's one energy goes into your ear, into your eye, and the ear is what makes it different, or that the energy itself is also different. It definitely is more intuitive, the latter, that the energy is also different, the way it goes in the eye. If you want all the proofs, you have to go back to chapter 2 and 3, to be very honest.
Isn't this the same thing which I asked you before, that Chayehu of Garmehu is different from Chayehu of...
There is no Chayehu of Garmehu. There's Iyu v'Chayehu Echad.
I mean the Iyu.
So it's different.
The Iyu of Garmehu is a different level.
It's the Keich HaGvul. Yes, the Keich.
Isn't it the thing that you're trying to talk about now?
That's not what he's talking about, no. Why are you saying that?
The Keach HaRe'iyah.
No, he's talking about the physical eye is obviously not created by the power of vision. That's a given, that we know.
No, not physical. I'm talking about the power of vision. I'm talking about.
The power of vision,
Is
okay.
this
Power of vision is now goes.
not the Chayehu of Garmehu? It's not the Ihu of Garmehu?
That's what he's going now. That the Garmeyo means, it says, so those are the
Correct.
Yes, so he's asking a question. Maybe, who says it's Er Pnimi? Maybe it's just an Er
You
Makif.
say there's only one Ihu, but here you say there's two kind of Ihu.
That's exactly right. So he's asking what's the proof for that?
Oh.
How do you know that? Back in chapter 2 and 3, he made the case very strongly. You see it in several other ways. You can see it. You'd have to go into. Let's say when a person gets older and their eyes get weaker. So you're going to argue is that it's just the keli. The air is the same. It's just now the keli is too weak to hold all the air in it. That's what you would say. And doesn't even impact the air itself. No, you can't say that. And that may be true, by the way. That may be true. That's not a problem.
Because if you do a transplant, then it's
right. And also, blind parents can give birth to seeing children. So clearly, there's a Keach HaRe'iyah. Yeah, your question is how do you know it's a Keach HaRe'iyah and not just a general energy? Maybe that's also a proof. If blind parents can give birth to a seeing child, so even if the kelim by them were defective, they still have the power of sight. A child can see. But you can still argue, you could say, no, the keli is good, the air will come in. If the keli is not there, the air won't come in. He clearly made the case that the air has to fit into the containers. Intuitively, I for sure get it. If you want the real logic, I would have to go back to chapter 2 and 3 where he specifically asked this question. If you look in chapter 2, when he establishes that the keiches hanefesh are keiches pnimim, he says the keiches pnimim, and then he says, "L'chein slapshim dafke bekelim haruim lehem." They're almost slavish in another keli. So in other words, for example, intelligence is only in the brain. You don't find intelligence in your fingers or in your feet. It could travel through there, but intelligence, the brain is a keli for intelligence.
But the but was if the neshama goes into a goof of a behemoth.
That was another proof, right?
That it can't manifest.
Right. Yeah, but you can still argue that because the keli is not there.
Right.
Yes, but he doesn't say it. He says it's clearly keiches premium. For example, the brain and the intelligence in the brain are fit toward each other. They fit into each other. It's a given.
The hand in the glove is always the hand changes, and you know something. If the hand was bigger than the glove and there was no kalim for it, you'd try to fix the kalim and you'd resew the glove. I mean, but there's always
look in chapter 3. He makes it very clear that they're keiches premium be'etzem, independent of the container. Even before they came to the container, there is.
The neshama in Gan Eden is learning Torah, right? So he said der hat ja bessere Kopf, der hat aber einen kleineren Kopf. Versteht mehr, versteht winziger. I mean, you're not talking about a keli over there. If you're talking about pure neshama,
which is also in a way a keli. Neshama is a hecheta, a nivra, together. Yeah.
You can't tell us a Kopf, der neshama verschabt.
Neshama der Atzilus, Savachap, Neshama der B'Yah.
Because it's more edel, not.
That's right. What's make it more edel?
That means it's closer to the source.
It's so subtle. It's like really.
I think you could also tell it from another thing. There's no question there's a life force that's equal in the whole body. From the head to the toe. And when a person, God forbid, dies, that life force leaves and everything dies. That's it. It's equal. To suggest that besides that, to suggest that there is no other element in the life force that's tailored to the particular parts of the body doesn't sound right. Because what you're saying then is the following. Then it's like I said before, imagine you plug in a machine and here a red light goes on, here a green light, here heat, here the wheels start turning. So there's no different energies going into the wheel than there is going into the lights. It's one energy and everything brought everything to life. Right? That's how you would want to argue would be the case. For some reason, something's wrong with that. I'm trying to find the right words. It doesn't sound right. No. Because there it's an inanimate machine that's being brought alive and the wheels are turning. You would then suggest that it's the body completely that has the power to
reveal this particular.
Yeah, to not even reveal. It's one energy. It's like you plug into electricity, the neshama flows into the body. It suddenly starts seeing with eyes and hearing with ears, but there's no keiches called keich hashmiya. He said, I don't have the right word, but for sure it's leik tzachazeh. Maybe also how the development of a child, maybe let me think about that. The soul goes into the body, so the child is conceived, starts developing. You don't even have arms and legs yet. You don't even have all the faculty. You don't even have yet all the limbs of the body. So it's definitely the neshama is making it grow. So it's growing and growing. As it grows,
not the neshama, you mean the nefesh,
the nefesh, yeah, the life force. As it grows, eyes develop, fingers develop. I'm not. For me, it's very clear that there are faculties in the soul itself. I don't know if you brought a proof for it. I think it's just a given to say. Let's say that there's Eshes Spheres is a given, but I don't know. I maybe I'm not finding the right words. Do you intuitively see it differently?
You can't say the neshama is making it grow because
not the neshama is made of parts, but the neshama has powers.
You can't say it's making it grow because before 40 days,
right.
It's not there.
He's using the same nefesh as the mother.
Yeah,
No, I'm not talking about the life force now. I'm talking about the faculties. What did you want to say?
Does the indication come from the information that the eye sends back to the brain? There has to be a
Feedback
particular
back
word
and
when
forth.
it's here.
Yeah, I said again. I am not applying myself so much because it's not really the point here. Your question should have been asked in chapter 3, but to me it's very clear it's that way. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense the other way.
I think the Rebbe talks about it in one of the...
As I said, the difference between Ratzon and Keiches makes it very clear. Ratzon, I see that, of course. You desire something, whether you desire to walk or to talk or to fly or to move your fingers or to walk or to move your nose. That's all one thing. That's just like it depends how the desire works, and it just works everywhere in an equal fashion, sending messages. But the actual function of the faculty is far more intricate. It's not just electricity goes in and then every part of the body. It also makes sense for another reason, actualizing potential. When a person educates themselves and the mind gets better because they study more. So you're going to say that simply the container is being more like oiled and therefore more seichel. Where's the seichel coming from?
Didn't he have that?
There's no seichel coming from the brain. The brain has no seichel. Just like the eye has no vision.
But it becomes a better keli for it.
And yeah, it becomes a better keli, absolutely. And if you damage the keli, God forbid, it makes the flow less. But to say that vision comes from the eye doesn't make any sense. That would be basically saying that the body, the machine, has power of its own. Again, I don't have the perfect basis. You could say, okay, why can't it be like a machine than just electricity makes it all? No, because there's no vision in the eye. The eye does not have vision. A corpse doesn't see. Nothing you can do about it.
It's no life force.
But that makes it alive. But I'm talking about the power to see. Does the eye actually have the power to see? All you need is to put electricity in? Or does the power of seeing come from the electricity, so to speak? To me, it's clear. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. But the point that he's going here, like he said in chapter 2, is that the nefesh mitzad atzma had his sheichel to ginyan gashmim. U'komeken gam keiches nefesh kedim salshus and he enu sheichel ninyanim gashmim. Same thing, faculties of the soul, also before they manifest in the body, do not have any relationship with Yonim Gashmim. So, by the way, all we're talking here is the svara of it. In Mikrahi, it says befedish. Then the Shom is Lamaila, use Chachma being a das, and Chesed Gvur the Feres. The question we're discussing here is what's the logic. But that it says so is no question about it. That souls, even without bodies, are learning Torah. So they clearly have an intellect that's not connected to the body, and says, like he says in Tanya, that every nefesh has eser keiches because nishtal shum mehem. And God says to create something b'tzelem elikim, He created the neshama with 10 keiches. I'm just saying, stay and stay zicher. That's not even a question. The question is whether it has also an absolute proof and logic or not. Okay, so even before Sheyachim Linyanim Gashmi. Nanim B'ziv Hashchina. V'ayidei Slapshusa B'guf Nasa B'china Shayches Linyanim Gashmi. And through manifesting and clothing in the body, they have the faculties begin to have a relationship with physical things, material things. So what is he proving from all of this? He's showing how as much as all the Elohim, all the qualities and virtues that the body has through the soul manifesting in it, it's still, the body takes control and causes it to become a gushim. He wants to say how the Garmuhi, in other words, even the Eir Primi HaMisyachadim HaKelim, it's all connected to Yisavas. It's not Eir that's connected to the Eir HaBlikvul. That's what he wants to make clear. V'hine be'emes, now in truth, Tachas HaKavanah b'Yidis HaNeshama Lamata, in truth, the ultimate purpose of the descent of the soul below, V'yislapshusa b'guf, and its manifestation in a body, Hu b'gdei l'hoyer es ha'elam, is in order to illuminate the world. U'kamei shekosov, what? Yeah. Like it says, the flame of Hashem, of God, is the soul of the human being. Just like a ner, a flame, candle, is there to radiate and illuminate the darkness. Same thing in Neshama, which is ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam, is also ner Hashem, is also a flame to illuminate. And because this world is a double and compounded double darkness, kafel means double, and kafel mechupel means double and compounded double, like quadruple. Right? You need to have many neiros. You need many lights, candles. And the shamesh lamata, right? And this is the descent of the souls below, in order to illuminate the world, the dark world. And in general, this is by Evdei Hashem Nishmason, those that serve God with their souls. As we'll learn, there's two types of Evdim. Evdei Hashem Nishmason, Evdim Hashem Begufam. Those that serve God with their souls, and those that serve God with their bodies. That's an example. Some of he brings in a Chedesh. Eliyahu was with the guf. That's why he went up with his body. It's ban, basically the shamas of ban. Their main service is refining the body, and tzaddikim whose main service is to illuminate the soul. So he says. So but generally, this is the Evdei Hashem ben Nishma. She'enim nitfosim begeshem. These souls that serve God with their souls are not manifest. They're not contained and shaped and impacted, or there's a word nitfosim. They're not trapped. Caught up in the geshem. They're there, but they don't get, like he said before, that the geshem affects the neshama. And the world does not conceal or cover on them. And the light of their souls radiate within them in a revealed way. And this is also, it's not that they ignore their bodies, it's also through the body. Is that their neshama is so powerful. He's bringing a case here which is different than what he was saying. This is not most people. In this case, the guf is just a vehicle for the soul's expression. So even by these neshamas who serve with the neshama, it's also through the body. Because before the soul came into the body, it was not in the gather. It wasn't even in the league or in the gather. It was not even in that world to radiate the universe. The only way the Ner Hashem, the neshama, the these that serve with their soul is to radiate, is that when the soul comes into a body, then they can illuminate. So what's unique about them if that's the case? All souls come into bodies. So what's unique is Raksha Guf ain't a master al neshama, as opposed to everybody else. The Guf does not conceal on their souls, does not cover up. Adarabah, on the contrary, Megala es loher lamata. It reveals the soul to illuminate below. So it's a neshama that's all here to illuminate. It's not affected by the darkness of this world.
Eliyahu.
He's not talking about Eliyahu now. He's talking about these people. It's a different type of Aveda with Eliyahu.
Maybe we can understand it because
Va'ikuru al-yedei Torah mitzvahs. And the primary way they do this is through Torah mitzvahs. Through that, specifically, they illuminate the world. What's the meaning of what does it mean to illuminate the world? Illuminate the world means to transform the darkness into light. Like he began at the beginning of chapter 154. Like he says, look at the Torah, Dibra Maskal, the mimer that begins Vaschana. And this power to transform darkness into light, this comes specifically through a transmission from Atzmus Ein Sof, like it says, Havaya will illuminate, will radiate, Yagia will make like a glow. Chashchi, my darkness. In order to illuminate the darkness, that's Vahavaya. That comes from the higher Shem Havaya. You need a special power. The Mashakasu Ke'ata Neri Havaya Hu Inyan Ner Hashem the Neshama. Because what it says Ata Neri Havaya, when we said Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that's Ner Hashem the Neshama. That's not the higher power. Because he's saying now the Neshama radiates and illuminates the world, but primarily through mitzvahs. Why? Because you can't just do it on your own. The mitzvahs add a dimension that allows you to transform it. Basically you can say you can illuminate, but you can't transform. So that's regular Ner Hashem. That will bring light into the room. That will bring light in a dark place. But you want to transform darkness to light, you need to have a power that's more than just light. You need to have the power of Havaya. It appears like you could think that he's going off on a tangent here. I don't think he is. I think it's just an Aveda. We'll see how he's going to tie it back. But let's just lose sight of where he's going here. All this was coming to explain how the air that Mislabish and the Kalim, that the Gamuri that he says in the Geras HaKodesh is also in order connected to creation, not to Gilui. And when it's connected, like he's giving the example, when the neshama comes into the body, even though the neshama is the powerful force, the body shapes the soul, makes it megushim. So now he went off. So he went to the whole purpose of creation, of radiating, illuminating. So we'll see where he's going to go with that. In other words, his point he began actually was with the opposite, to show how the physical body and its faculties lower the soul and make them megushim. Now he went back. That's the purpose. To bring down the soul into Gashmis and to transform the darkness to light. So, in a way, he's gone away from what his original point was. His original point was the opposite. Was to show how it comes down. But he's now going back to the purpose. But I'm sure he's going to tie it back together. We'll see. And that's Shem Havai Delela. So, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. When you say Ner Hashem, clearly is Havaya Delatata, is a lower level Havaya. That's the level of Ataneri Havaya. And Vavaya Yagiyah Choshchi, is that the end of the pasuk? How does it go? Vavaya Yagiyah Choshchi, Ataneri Havaya, Vavaya Yagiyah Choshchi? Is that the full pasuk? I think so. That would make it even clearer. The pasuk begins, you are my flame, God. Vavaya Yagiyah Choshchi. What's the second Havaya? So the first is the soul. I think it's the same pasuk, or maybe a pasuk before. It's in, where is it? We say it in Chanukah, we use it. It's a pasuk Mishnah, maybe. What the Hashem Havai Delela? The next page, Shinvav. And this transmission is through Torah mitzvahs, which draws down the higher Havaya to transform darkness to light. And now he goes even further. I see this whole thing. The Zohar has been Amshach of the Neshama, Amshach of the Torah mitzvahs. And this also explains, this is the difference between the Amshach of the Neshama itself. What does the Neshama do? And what do Torah mitzvahs do? It's a common question we ask, right? You say the Neshama is itself flame, fire, light. So what do Torah mitzvahs add? We say, so he says, and Neshama is b'kei chatzma mashichim raka'ara levat. Neshama is with their own power, self-generated power. They can only draw down only a reflection. And even though they draw down very high levels, it's all these levels are just a reflection. But if you want atzmis that transforms, hamshacha the Torah mitzvahs, hamshacha atzmis. Torah mitzvahs brings down hamshacha atzmis. I think he's also going back to Matan Torah. I think. Okay, we'll soon tie it all together. I'm sure this is not just a tangent. Impossible. I think it's actually very geschmack kabir is going on a matla maila da aveda. He was talking first about Eir and Gelim. I was going, okay, let's see. The Hainu hamshacha maila lamata kaneda. So Torah mitzvahs is hamshacha maila lamata. Hamshacha atzmis. So neshamas below, they draw down energy at very high levels, but it's all a reflection. You want a core energy, you need Torah mitzvahs for that.
They draw down by the virtue of their being, right?
Yeah.
In this world.
Yeah. Because they have their flames.
Their lights. Their light.
Yeah. Look, other places it says that the Torah mitzvahs helps ignite the neshama, and then the neshama can illuminate. Here he's speaking a little differently. He's saying that the neshama is only hara.
So it's like comparing a propellant like gasoline to atomic energy, which uses the core. Right?
Yeah. Look, at some places it says neshama brings down much higher power than Torah mitzvahs. He's going now like this. This is not.
Let's say. I mean, think of it like in a dark world, and then every neshama is like a little light, right? Lights, a whole bunch of lights in a dark place.
Yeah. Like you said before, like candles, yeah. Well, I can't say without doing anything, because, look, the fact is, you have neshamas that are remember, speaking about Evdi Hashem ben Nishmosam, I mean, you have many people who don't bring light into the world. They bring darkness into the world, even though the neshamas are there.
That's negatively impacting their lights. But by just the virtue of their being, it's a little light. If they do...
they probably have to do something. It may not be maybe not Torah mitzvahs. In other words, they're like... think of it like this. Maybe when you see a tzaddik, even if he's not doing anything, he's bringing light into the world. And then when he does a mitzvah, he brings a far greater light. He's not spelling it out. Let me see. I don't want to speculate, because I'm not sure where this is going exactly. And dafka through this, the Torah mitzvah says hamshacha atzmis from havai de le'ela, like he said, that specifically is what creates transformation, darkness to light. I used to always think in Tanya, when he says, for example, the Beinoni and the Tzaddik, so we know the Beinoni and Tzaddik and the Levushim are similar. Because it says the Beinoni in his Machshava Dibra Maisi, he never does an Avera. A Tzaddik also never does an Avera. The difference is, a Beinoni has the power to do one. He has a Nefesh Abamis that's alive. However, he represses it. I'm talking about the ultimate Beinoni. And a tzaddik either kills the Yetzer Hara or doesn't even have the desire in the first place. The Beinoni has a war, a battle. A tzaddik doesn't have a battle. I always thought to myself, so what's really the difference? If you met a Beinoni and a tzaddik, would you be able to see the difference between them? In action, you wouldn't. Because they both, even the Beinoni, will never do an Avera.
No, you wouldn't, because the Rabbi thought that he was a
tzaddik can do his half.
No, but he says clearly, not Avera miyamav, not machshava, not dibur, not ma'is.
You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a Beinoni.
You wouldn't be able to. But would there be a way to be able to tell? So I always thought to myself, yeah, how they impact somebody else. A Beinoni can't make someone bigger than himself. You know, he could inspire someone, but a tzaddik can actually transform darkness to light because it's transformed by him. So the impact would be bigger on another person.
The difference is his half.
I'm just using an example. I mean, a sabcha is a major difference. One thing is to bring light into darkness, another is to transform darkness to light.
Yeah.
It's a far different. The same thing, true bittul. He's bringing another addition. Besides what we just said, true bittul comes through Torah mitzvahs, not the neshama alone. Like he says in Tanya chapter 35, that even a tzaddik gomer, a complete tzaddik who serves God with awe, respect and love, b'tainugim, which is a very deep level of love, with pleasure. Nevertheless, he's not completely bottle in this world. To be completely united and fused in a total unity. He's like Yesh Misha. He's a separate entity that fears God and loves God. So he's not like completely seamless. He's an entity that's what he says in Tanya. Mashenken ha-mitzvahs, but mitzvahs add something. This is even a tzaddik gomer. Mitzvahs add a dimension that the person doesn't have on his own. What does it add? Shem primis l'tzenis baruch. So this is a tzaddik on his own. He fears God, he loves God. He could say Ava and Yichud and Yid is also a mitzvah. I guess he means it how it's on the person. It's not as he performs a mitzvah, it's as he's permeated with the divine, he's still a separate entity. But mitzvah is primus etzenius baruch. Mitzvah is the inner core desire of God. Miyuchad v'nichlal b'etzenius baruch. V'hoyel achad mamar b'yichud gama. We have to look in Tanya. They are united and completely encompassed in the God's desire, and they're united mamish, b'yichud gama, in a total unity, total fusion. And same thing, to perfect the world, to illuminate the world, is specifically through Torah mitzvahs. What time do we have?
10:47.
So he's basically brought two differences between Torah mitzvahs and neshama. The first is the neshama only brings a ha'ara, a reflection, and Torah mitzvahs brings the core. And that's why it can transform. And the second thing, it brings a bittul that even a tzaddik doesn't have on his own, because in this world he's still not completely... No, you can't say a tzaddik is a mitzvah. A mitzvah is God's desire. A tzaddik is an entity that's completely dedicated, but he's an entity. So you can't just say a tzaddik is a mitzvah in this, what he says there. Yeah. And the same thing, to affect the world is through Torah mitzvahs, which actually is a third thing, it looks like he's saying. Because a tzaddik, he gives off light, but to change the world you need to do a mitzvah. You put on tefillin, you take cloth, and you turn it into, that's what he's saying.
So even a Rosh has the ability to do one mitzvah.
And a chanami, but he's trying to explain what's the difference between the neshama's impact and on its own, and what Torah mitzvahs add into the equation. Look, he's going to say something which brings it back to the theme. This is also the difference between the patriarchs. The Ovis HaMatan Torah, the Hine Be'inyin, the Hoyeres HaElam, Yesh B'zeh Chiluk. In the role of illuminating the world, there's a difference. Im b'masha elam layalam v'yastar alakus. There's a difference if the world should not conceal and cover up an alakus. That's a lower level. That's that it shouldn't conceal, which is what the Ovis did. Or that the darkness and the concealment should actually be transformed to light. And the Ovis, who their work came with their own power, didn't come with tzivui. They were not Metzuva v'Esa besides Milah. There was no Sinai yet that commanded them, so it was their own effort. Bizgalus er nishmasam, by revealing the power, the light of their souls, they drew down and revealed the Lakusan world. They drew down a divine revelation that the world should not conceal or cover. He's going back to the theme he spoke earlier. Remember we talked about chesodin. That there shouldn't be any diminishing, any lack of energy, divine energy. And therefore, naturally will also not allow for any type of suckling or the vampires, right? Suckling or achiza, or holding on to, grasping. Like we learned before, chapter 143, right? That whole chapter with Chesodin HaLevana, right? But in order for there to be the transformation of darkness to light, that's what Matan Torah came. So basically, the Ovis are like the classic idea of a neshama and a tzaddik without Torah mitzvahs. I mean, without Torah mitzvahs, in other words, that they're commanded. We're not talking about kimuka Ovis Torah Achlei Nitna. That's on their own initiative and more beruchnius, right? By Matan Torah, it was Amshachas Atzmos. So both elements that we discussed earlier. Three things. Number one, that's not just ha'ara, a reflection, but it's the etzem core. Number two, that it is not just the tzaddik, but he's a mitzias. That's batel. Whereas the mitzvah by Torah mitzvahs is mamash one. And finally, through mitzvahs you actually transform the world, not just radiate, not just illuminate the world. All this now that we've just said is by Evdei Hashem b'nishmasa. And even there's a distinction. Mashenkin Evdei Hashem b'gufam. In contrast, those that serve God with their bodies are Eir Eliki Bo Behem B'Hakshama. He's going now back to his original theme. The Kalim, how the Kalim affect the Eir. By them, the Eir Eliki came B'Hakshama, becomes shaped by the matter and substance. Even though these neshamas who serve with their bodies, even though they also bring down a divine revelation through their work and yigiyah and through their exertion, they impact and refine birur. They cleanse or refine the animal soul. So even though they also bring down the divine, reveal the divine, nevertheless it comes in hakshama. It's not removed. It is. There is a tfisa achiza in elam hazeh. The kashem shaguf master le'er nishmosan kamoikin harihu master le'er kusha ben mamshichim. So just like their body does conceal the light of their souls, the same thing, it conceals on the divine that they draw down. And this is what it means, that also in Aveda, through being nitfus, being trapped, held on, contained by the Gashmis, that the Gashmis is affecting. They are nitfus in it. They are not invested. They are. Doesn't say. It just says a different type of person. So even in Baveda, that also in Aveda, through the fact that it does relate to and is grasped, is contained by the material, which is the idea of someone serving with their body, the Eir Eliki, the divine energy, comes in Hakshama, in a Gashmizdik way. And how much more so in the general manifestation? He's going now back to the original topic of the soul and the body. That the light of the soul, the energy of the soul, becomes materialized and becomes crass, or according to, commensurate to the organs of the body.
Which doesn't happen to either by Nishmosim.
Yeah. And all this, okay. I would submit and say that I think this whole piece he added later in the Ksaviyat.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds very much like it. But it's a very helpful piece. Even though it does seemingly take us off the track, because he's giving in Aveda an example of what he's discussing here. In other words, you could say Evdei Hashem b'nishmosim is like how Eir sees, how the Eir Hablikvul sees Eir. Yeah, no. He began, but Evdei Begufam, or generally people, it's the other way around. It's how the Keli shapes the Eir. And yet, it's still, and then they reveal godliness that way. Evdei Hashem b'nishmosim seems to be how Eir Hablikvul affects Eir Hagvul, like the artist, coming from the artist's point of view. And there, the body does not conceal, but yet it's also a lower level, like the others, compared to Matan Torah. Very interesting. Very interesting. She'eris and Kalim. Let's see how the Eisfir is. An example of this above. Remember, the whole thing began. This was all. If you go back, look at the line 5 of the beginning of the chapter. He says, "Kamal derech moshel beguva nefesh." Now he's finishing. Now the moshel has been finished. Now he's going back to the nimshel. So what's he saying? Like this. So he's saying, I don't think we'll finish the chapter, but let's go a few more lines. An example for this is Be'ina Irva Gamur Echad. Remember, that according to the Tanya, Gas HaKedesh, Irva Gamur Echad is Eir Pnimi, the way it manifests in containers. She'er bo b'slapshus v'tfisa b'akli. That Gas HaKedesh is not just talking about Eir, it's how the Eir is manifest, and tfisa, and being held on by the container, contained by the container. That means the outer dimension of the container that confine the energy, and it becomes bakshama in a type of material way, materialized according to the personality of the containers. The kamoy benefesh inyan evdi Hashem benishmas ma'adugma zelamayel b'chinas primis hakelim. Benefesh evdi Hashem benishmasam. That's an example primis hakelim. They also have containers. She'izgalus v'er v'hu she'ein nitfus. There, the primary driving force is the air. This is a very beautiful connection to it all. I'll explain it. It's very nice. He's bringing down everything. He's tying together everything he spoke earlier. Primis hakelim, chetzenis hakelim. Remember, with Misper, it's all coming together. So just like remember, how air sees air, it's much more bittul. Here he's going even primis hakelim. So Evdei Hashem b'nishmasim is primis hakelim. That's his galus ha'er, hu she'ein nitfus. That's higher than the relationship of air to creation. What it says in Ageres HaKedesh, where he says remember he says even though it's air primi, it's livrei. It's focusing on its power to create. That's the outer dimension of the containers that actually create, materialize, or give some matter to the energy. אך באר זהו גם כן בחצייניס האר, שבזה שייך להם יש הכלים מקבילים מסער. אך באר זהו גם כן בחצייניס האר.
Das hat früher gesagt, dass viele Zeit Gomer ewig dabei beaven beira. Und tegen is den Bibel. Das ist sie da hier von Akshom. Darf dann kommen zu mir.
So now we just said that this is primis hakelim, chetzenis hakelim. Now he's saying also in the air, it's the chetzenis hakelim and primis hakelim. What are you asking?
What is happening to ewig dabei benishmasim?
He said that's like the primis hakelim.
Aber sie da Akshom, sie da.
No.
Weil gesagt früher, a viele Zeit Gomer bringt von Tanya.
He's inside of a body. He's an entity. He's an entity, but he's not nitfus in it. He's there, but he's not nitfus in it. He doesn't have the etzema air. And the power to transform.
He's still somewhat nitfus in it.
It says no. The only Evdei Hashem ben Gufam he says is nitfus. He says clearly it's not nitfus. I don't know what you mean by nitfus. Maybe you translate what you mean.
Held on. That's the way I wrote it down. Nitfus.
Bound by, right. On the Neshama B'guf, a tzaddik has a soul inside of a body. It doesn't mean his body binds his soul. There's several levels here. You could have a soul without a body altogether. That's above. You have a soul in the body. The minimum is that it's in the body and it needs the body to work. But the body doesn't conceal anything. That still doesn't mean it can transform darkness to light. It just means it naturally flows. Right. Then there's Evdei Hashem ben Gufam, the next deeper level, the lower level, where the body does impact the soul. It makes it b'hakshama. That's clearly, he says it clearly. Ageres HaKedesh is talking in Aveda, he's talking how it becomes b'hakshama. Not talking about Evdei Hashem ben Nishmasam and Aveda. That would be primis ha'er and primis hakelim. Basically, it goes like this: Eir HaBligvul sees everything from the eyes of God. Eir HaBligvul then wants Shir Atzmei and defines Eir HaGvul. That also is still all from the eyes of the divine. That's all Iyu v'Chayu. Then comes another thing. God wants a world, a yesh. The other extreme. A yesh is completely concealed, but there's energy inside the kelim. There's two levels. One is Evdei Hashem ben Nishmasam, Begufam, let's start with that. That the kelim affect the air. That's Chetzenis air, Chetzenis hakeli. Then there's the Primis hakeli and Primis air, that's Evdei Hashem ben Nishmasam. They're also inside of a keli, but they're still sensing the air. And then there's the air as it's sensed by Bligvul. You really have Eir HaBligvul, Eir HaGvul, Bligvul, how it manifests Eir HaGvul. You have Eir HaGvul inside the kelim, and there are two levels. It's like Shnayim Shem Arba. It's very clear. If you think about it, it really comes down to how, again, the interface. How much air, how much keli. And you have, the beauty here is that you have, even in Keli itself, you have Evdei Hashem b'nishmasim, Evdei Hashem. So Evdei Hashem b'nishmasim is still within the Keli. That's why it's a yesh, it's a tzaddik that he's a Metzias. But it's like the Avos before Matan Torah. And Matan Torah starts bringing in the energy as it is from the Eir HaBli. Very, very powerful stuff. Yeah, but take the Ikar. So I think I'm just going to read another few lines and we'll stop here.
The Avos before there was also Evdei Hashem b'gufam, right?
He says Evdei Hashem b'nishmasam.
So then they're previous. He just says that they maintained the they didn't.
It's like without Torah mitzvahs. It's Evdei Hashem b'nishmasam, so they maintain. Yeah, but he says clearly it's Evdei Hashem b'nishmasam. Read it, you'll see. Merkava. Merkava is Evdei Hashem b'nishmasam. Right, and before that is Evdei Hashem b'nishmasam. Yeah. Now he says, Ach be'er zeh gam ken b'chetzein se'er shebezeh shaykh lem shakelim makbilim se'er. So also in the Eid, it's also the outer dimension of air. That's where you can say the containers confine them, the energy, that they should be like the personality of the containers. But not the inner dimension of energy. Shesham his gabra se'er. There, the energy is what dominates and overpowers. V'gam ha'kelim ein b'chinas mitzias mamish. And also the containers are not really a mitzias, a real substance. Okay. I think we should stop here and we'll continue. We'll finish this. He's going to start explaining it with the Shema Etzem, Shema Te'er.
Is that where stop?
I'm stopping by then the parentheses. So let's stop here, if you don't mind. Chapter 155. We began pages 305 and 306.